All right, Isaiah 26. Now, most commentators agree 24 through 27, 26, 27, they kind of go together. 24 goes with 25, and 26 is really closely relevant. There's not like a really strong break. And even in some of the divisions, commentators argue that there shouldn't be a chapter break in some of these. Otherwise, it'd just be this super long extended chapter. But it's the same message, or one very closely related, continues here in chapter 26. In that day, this song will be sung in the land of Judah. Again, this song is continuing. Isaiah continues his song of trust in God's capability to accomplish his covenant deliverance. And in the remainder of 26, he's going to encourage the faithful remnant who endure the tribulation. In that day, this song will be sung in the land of Judah. We have a strong city. He has set up salvation as its walls and bulwarks. Open the gates that the righteous nation may keep faith, that keeps faith may enter in. Okay, pause. In the Messianic age, God's people celebrate their strong city, but it's difficult to say whether Isaiah refers to God's heavenly city, which we've talked about, or earthly Jerusalem that's being rebuilt. Probably both. And other biblical authors, other prophets will talk about both cities. So it could really go either way. Isaiah refers to the city's walls as salvation for likely two reasons. First, tribulation survivors literally find refuge within the walls as a figurative salvation. There's a figurative hope that is salvation. But second, and more importantly, no unbeliever will be permitted entrance into the Messianic city in the Messianic age. Spiritual rebirth is the price of entry into Messianic Jerusalem. So when he says salvation are your walls, literally that's the barrier. Only those who have accepted salvation can enter here. And look, it says open up the gates so that the nation who keeps the faith may enter in. I'm going to break my rule and jump again to Revelation 21, where John the Apostle says, but nothing unclean will ever enter it, nor anyone who does what is detestable or false, but only those whose names are written in the Lamb's book of life. So again, the hope of the covenant fulfillment, there's a figurative application of salvation, you could say, and of course, that's not wrong, but it's more than that. There's a actual salvation that is required to even pass through those walls. So interesting. Okay, onward. Another one we could spend all day on. Verse 3, you keep him in perfect peace whose mind is stayed on you because he trusts you. Trust in the Lord, therefore, forever. For the Lord is an everlasting rock. Isaiah encourages Judah to trust in God's promises of final and permanent deliverance, saying, those who trust in the Lord will be steadfast. The kind of language here. Placing our trust in God's ability to accomplish his purposes is the foundation of steadfast and enduring faith. And here come some promises. For he has humbled the inhabitants of the high and lofty city. There's that city again. We're going to get into it, I think, a little bit more in chapter 27, where I'll break it down more in the notes. But there's another reference. He lays it low. He lays it low to the ground, casts it to the dust. Again, it goes very well with chapter 24 and chapter 25. The foot tramples it, the feet of the poor, the steps of the needy. And that's very reminiscent to descriptions of the fall of Babylon, the epicenter of that Babylon system that will never again be inhabited. It will be trampled underfoot and left to nothing. The path of the righteous is level. You make level the way of the righteous. Some have suggested that this could be a subtle reference to the highway of Isaiah 19 and Isaiah 35. We haven't gotten to Isaiah 35 yet, so I'm going to wait on that. But there actually might be more than just a figurative promise of the path of the righteous is level, meaning their promises are sure. But no, it actually could be actual steps, an actual path. And, I think both are true. You make level the way of the righteous. Like literally, he talks about clearing the debris and making dry paths through rivers for the returning refugees to come back to the land. I mean, it's very real, but it's also figurative. I think you got both. You could say, it's a promise that goes both ways. That's what's so remarkable about a lot of these is Some people try to pigeonhole, it's got to either be this or it's got to be that. And no, actually, it's both. It's that there's a tangible, literal fulfillment of this promise at the end of the age that is also expressed figuratively beforehand. Maybe in like kind, but in lesser degree, you could say. God uses redemptive discipline to produce righteousness. Isaiah describes a degree of trust in God that welcomes his redemptive discipline without aversion. That's what we're getting into here with verses 7 and on. God's people are not concerned with escaping his discipline, but they wait eagerly for the deliverance and redemption to follow. Okay, so let's pause on the notes and read this. In the path of your judgments, O Lord, we wait for you. He's not waiting for escape. He's actually waiting for the judgments to conclude and the final deliverer to arrive. My soul learns. He says, your name and your remembrance are the desire of my soul. Even greater than my own relief in this moment is my desire for God's name and remembrance. This is so paralleled by Micah, which I'm going to cut to in just a moment. But this is critical. What he's describing here is, again, an appeal and an encouragement to the righteous who are enduring the tribulation, who have not been removed from the tribulation. In many places where Isaiah promises God's preservation, God's strengthening those who are in the midst of the tribulation having to endure it, who have not yet been killed. Because again, in the rebellion, there's mass persecution. And so even to make it to the tribulation is a major step because of the extent that wicked system will go to persecute the church through martyrdom. And so even to get to the point of the tribulation is already a remnant. And even then, to be surviving in the midst of that is a remnant more. And so he says, those of you who are there, again, this is before the resurrection, which is very, very highly biblically substantiated and passages that we're going to continue to look through. Even here within Isaiah, he says, in the path of your judgments, O Lord, we wait for you. Saying, I'm not preoccupied with getting out of this. What I'm preoccupied with is that God's name and his remembrance will be made great across the earth. My soul yearns for you in the night. My spirit within me earnestly seeks you. Now, why would that be if the righteous are taken away from the tribulation? It wouldn't make any sense. For when your judgments are in the earth, the inhabitants of the earth will learn righteousness. There's this redemptive movement that's happening. Isaiah understood God's judgment was absolutely necessary to address wickedness and produce lasting global covenant fulfillment. Isaiah has made a transition now from the dread and crippling grief of chapter 21 to songs of advocacy for God's judgment in chapter 26. I mean, he's talking about what was happening in chapter 21, but here he's saying, you know what? I'm going to set that grief aside because your name and remembrance are going to be worth it. The promise on the other side of the resurrection and all these things we looked at in chapter 25, amazing, amazing. Because here's the problem. If favor is shown to the wicked, then he does not learn righteousness. And if there's no prophetic witness in the midst of that, then that redemptive appeal is not fully manifest. In the land of righteousness, he deals corruptly and does not see the majesty of the Lord. O Lord, your hand is lifted up, but they do not see it. That's why the prophetic witness of the church is so crucial in that day. Let them see your zeal for your people and be ashamed. Wow. Let them see your zeal for your people and be ashamed. That could mean a lot of things. And some people are going to say, well, that means the final deliverance or it means the resurrection. No, I think also it means God's preservation of his people in the midst of the tribulation, which is going to happen in Egypt. We looked at that. I mean, imagine having just read Isaiah 19 and now looking at this, and the Egyptians are saying, God is actually preserving us in the midst of this tribulation, and he's showing his zeal for his people and causing the wicked to be ashamed. That's happening in Egypt in real time in the tribulation. I mean, it's remarkable. We just looked at that. Let the fire of your adversaries consume them. Okay, so quickly, before we move on too far from those verses, just to point out much more reinforcement of Isaiah's idea of the prophetic witness of the righteous being preserved through the tribulation, not being removed from it, but being preserved through it until that resurrection point. Rejoice not over me, my enemy. This is Micah chapter 7, where Micah says, no, we're going to be enduring this judgment. I'm here. And just as God's people, God's faithful remnant, were not preserved from exile. If you think of Daniel, he says, no, we are in this. We're included because we are a prophetic witness, just as Micah said he is, just as Isaiah said he was back in chapter 8. Okay, pause. Search. He says, sons, portent. No, you say children or you say sons? Let's just look up portents. Yeah, Isaiah chapter 8. Isaiah says, behold, I and my children who are going to be enduring this, who God has given me, are signs and a witness and portents in Israel from the Lord of hosts who dwells in Mount Zion. Saying our literal existence in enduring this with you is meant to be a redemptive sign that you would recognize in return, which is exactly what Israel does in the tribulation, which is so awesome. So, okay. Israel in parts of Egypt and parts of even what would be the ancient Assyrian area are going to experience a returning and a spiritual awakening in the midst of all of this. And how can that be if all the righteous have been taken away? Anyway, okay, I'm getting off topic. Okay, Micah chapter 7 and verse 8, Micah says to the wicked nations, he says, don't rejoice over me, O my enemy, even though there's this temporary season of discipline, I will rise. When I sit in darkness, the Lord will be light to me. I love that. All right, Isaiah chapter 3, Isaiah says, so tell the righteous that it will be well with them, for they will eat the fruit of their deeds, and there's going to be preservation. But he says in verse 11, woe to the wicked, for it will be ill with them. This differing experience, depending on if you are this unrepentant wicked or if you are redempted, part of the righteous or under discipline. It has a redemptive discipline and a redemptive quality. There's a redemptive quality and there's a punitive quality. And Isaiah is really trying to distinguish that here. Isaiah chapter 8, Isaiah said, I will wait for the Lord, who is a hiding place for the house of Jacob. I will hope in him. And the whole context of chapter 8 is enduring the difficulty and the turmoil because there's a dawn coming. And that dawn happens in chapter 9, which we looked at a few weeks ago. How about chapter 25, where we just looked at, Isaiah says, it will be said on that day, behold, this is our God. We have waited for him that he might save us. Well, what does that matter if the righteous are not there? They didn't have to wait. No, there's actual waiting on the Lord. That is a prophetic witness in the midst of that tribulation. And again, in Hebrews chapter 12, verse 8, the author of Hebrews says, listen, if we, even the righteous, are left without discipline, if we're excluded, if we are excluded from the discipline and partitioned away from the discipline that all participate in, then we become illegitimate children and are not sons. And that's why, again, it's highly, highly reinforced. And I'm only really going up to Isaiah and then cherry picking from Hebrews. But many, many more are going to give prophetic encouragements to the righteous who endure the rebellion and the tribulation for a reason. So, and Daniel is going to make that very abundantly clear. Okay, we'll get to that though very soon. If favor is shown to the wicked, verse 11. Okay, good. Verse 12. For the Lord, starting in verse 12, was it in verse 11? Oh yeah, we'll just start in verse 11. Isaiah walks Israel through these four kind of "O Lord" statements or "O Lord" confessions. In verse 11, he's praying for the defeat of Israel's enemies by God's wrath. In verse 12, he declares his trust and dependence on God's faithfulness to accomplish his covenant. God, you will ordain peace for us. That's a statement, kind of a proclamation, but I think it's also kind of a prayer. Maybe it's a prophetic declaration. Ordain peace, during the tribulation. What a great prayer that is. O Lord our God, other lords beside you have ruled over us, but your name alone will we bring to remembrance. Isaiah is confessing Israel's spiritual infidelity, but declares a rededication. Israel's former lovers were unable to satisfy their desire that was intended to be met in intimacy with God. So in jealousy, For Israel's affection, God punishes Israel's deceivers and oppressors. God will restore Israel's covenant blessing in the context of renewed intimacy, which is the whole book of Isaiah, the whole book of Hosea, which is the whole book of Hosea. Isaiah is just summarizing Hosea in just a little couple phrases here. All those former lovers are dead. They will not live. They are shades and they will not rise. For to that end you have visited them with destruction and wiped out all remembrance of them. Hosea gives you all that in much more detail. And then in verse 15, but you have increased the nation, O Lord. You have increased the nation and you are glorified. You have enlarged all our borders of the land. It's a season of covenant fulfillment, and that enlarging of the nation and expanding of the borders is often referred to as blessing of supernatural population increase. Their populations being restored. And there's a reason for that. We looked at in previous chapters how humanity becomes rare, how there's catastrophic population collapse, but there's also promises of supernatural population restoration, you should say. And that would be one of them here. Verse 16, O Lord, in our distress, they sought you. Wait, who sought you? In their distress, they sought you. They poured out even the whisper of a prayer when your discipline was upon them. And then here we go. This is so critical. In verse 17, Isaiah describes Israel's gradual spiritual awakening during the discipline of the tribulation. This growing faithful remnant confesses their inability to independently accomplish God's redemptive plan, recognizing God's restraint of their capacity when it's detached from the intimate relationship that they're meant to have with the Lord. We see that here, like a pregnant woman who writhes and cries out in pain, about to give birth because she's in birth, when she's near giving birth. Here is Israel feeling we're near giving birth, and we give all of our effort, we give all of our strength, we do it all in our own strength, matter of fact. We writhe about when we give birth to wind. We give birth to nothing. There's no substance to our effort. There's no lasting result. We just end up with wind. We end up with really the wickedness of their adversarial nations. We've accomplished no deliverance in the earth. And that's an important admission because Israel is destined to accomplish deliverance for the earth. And that is accomplished at the coming of the Messiah. But up to that point, especially in their rebellion, as they're trying to orchestrate it in their own strength, it comes to nothing. And this is their confession. There's no deliverance that we can accomplish in all the earth. For the inhabitants of the world have not fallen, meaning that the wicked nations have not been subject to the order of the covenant. The wickedness has not been driven from the earth. Oh, and I just want to point out this because of you, O Lord. I think that because of you, O Lord, that's there is really important because it's actually the Lord restrains the covenant from being accomplished when it's being done apart from intimacy, when it's being done at the expense of the great commandment, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. When we pursue even good things like the Great Commission, apart from intimacy, we become that woman in labor who gives birth to wind because of the Lord, because he restrains us from accomplishing it apart from the context of love and intimacy and relationship to God and reliance on him. Not on our own strength, where we are the ones ramping it up and doing it. And there are many sincere believers who are caught in that and who actually have got to pause and reset and say, okay, I'm going to prioritize intimacy the way the Lord commands and the way that Jesus demonstrated. And then something happens. Your dead shall live. Their bodies shall rise. You who dwell in the dust, awaken and sing for joy. For your dew is the dew of light. The dawn is happening, and the earth will give birth to the dead. What a promise. So, in verses 20 and 21, the end of this chapter, sorry, I had to pause to catch up with my notes because I know these are a little bit different. Isaiah shifts here, and he's encouraging the remaining remnant to take shelter as the plagues of God's wrath are released related to that first resurrection. Now there is a first resurrection of the righteous, which is very clearly described. It's several biblical authors, but probably best of all in the book of Revelation, where the righteous are raised, but the dead are ultimately raised to the final judgment, the wicked. And so there's this first resurrection. And so he's giving this promise of the righteous will be raised at the coming of the Messiah. Beautiful. There's resurrection. And this is different than the rapture. This is not quite the same. That's not exactly what Isaiah is talking about here. The rapture would be people who have not died, who are receiving resurrected bodies, along with the dead who are rising. But Isaiah hasn't mentioned that yet. So we're not quite talking about the rapture. Even though my stance is that they occur at the same time. But the exact timing of when that is really better substantiated in later text. This is not a proof text for the rapture by any sense. So I'm not going to get into that. But before that, for those who are there, Isaiah gives this instruction. He says, "Come, my people, enter your chambers, shut your doors, hide yourselves for a little while," because they're still there, because they're present. They're actually still there. As it was in Isaiah's generation, Assyria invaded Israel, and God did not remove the righteous from that judgment. Think about Babylon and all of the prophets that they took captive and persecuted. It's just a little bit of a different way of thinking. If you think that there's this escape from that day, there's preservation in the midst of it. And it's a different treatment of God's judgment. It's not just wrath, punitive wrath. There's redemptive discipline. And the prophetic church, that's where the prophetic church is. It's helping nurture the awakening that's happening in the midst of the redemptive discipline. Because both are happening. The wicked are being judged, and the righteous and the hope of anybody who would turn to the Lord in that midst is being fostered by the prophetic church. So here's the instruction. "Come, my people, enter your chambers, hide yourself, for the Lord is coming out of his place to punish the inhabitants of the earth." Now this is different. This is not the Lord raising up the Antichrist. This is the Lord coming out of his chamber. This is not the earth reacting in consequence to sinful actions and climate events or cosmic events or the actions of wicked nations. No, this is the Lord coming out of his chamber. These are the final judgments as the Messiah is coming and related to this resurrection moment that we just looked at. Too far. To punish the inhabitants of the earth for their iniquity. The earth will disclose the blood shed on it, and it will no more cover its sins. Meaning this is the day this is the final atonement. Let me scroll up. This is like the massive, we're going to atone for all of this here and now. For those who have not embraced the cross, for those who have not embraced the gospel, this is the reckoning. And so the righteous who were there, he's saying, take shelter. It's very practical. Isaiah encourages the remaining remnant to take shelter as the plagues of God's wrath are released related to the first resurrection. These plagues are more than the tyranny of the Antichrist terrorizing the earth, but sovereign acts of God that John the Apostle would later call bowls of judgment, as Israel's Messiah descends from the right hand of the Father. Now there is a resurrection associated with this moment, but that Isaiah is referencing up here. The earth will give birth to the dead, but those who are not included in that resurrection, maybe these are the undecided, those who have not aligned themselves with the Antichrist, but they've not yet fully received salvation. Even then, there's an appeal. Even if you're not in that party of the first resurrection, Isaiah still is making an appeal. There still is opportunity. And that opportunity extends into the Messianic age, which we've talked about in previous weeks. And so this appeal is really going to those who are not resurrected, but they are on the earth who still have the capacity for restoration and salvation in the Messianic age. It's those survivors that we just looked at in a recent passage. Isaiah chapter 4, "And those who are left in Zion will be called holy, everyone who has been recorded for life in Jerusalem at the coming of the Messiah." So he's appealing to those survivors. Hide yourselves for a moment, because there's a Passover, an end time Passover is happening. Just like when Israel had to shut their doors and do the lamb's blood on their posts. Now, I'm not saying it's exactly those are the instructions they have to do. But anyway, it's a similar appeal being made here at the end of chapter 26. Okay, finally, let's get to chapter 27.